My son's wife told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas, said her mother's grand ranch needed important guests, not an aging widow. She didn't even dismount her horse to deliver the blow. I'm Martha, 62, running my Wyoming cattle ranch alone since my husband died. For 7 years, I shrank myself, believing good mothers stay quiet and out of the way. But that morning, something in me broke. I saddled my mare, rode 40 miles through December snow with only his journal and my rifle, and found truth at a trading post, along with a sheriff who showed me exactly what my family had lost. When our dance photograph hit the Cheyenne newspaper, my family finally realized what they'd thrown away. Too late. They thought rejecting me would make me smaller. Instead, I became someone they couldn't ignore. Have you ever had to leave everything familiar to remember your own worth? Drop a comment and subscribe, because what happened next will surprise you. The December wind cut across the Wyoming plains like a skinning knife as I stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. 7 years of doing this alone, and my body still knew the rhythm. Boots crunching through fresh snow, breath clouding in the frozen air, the cattle lowing soft and low from the near pasture. I pulled my shawl tighter and made my way to the barn, Henry's old work coat hanging by the door like a ghost I couldn't quite let go of. The cattle needed feeding, fences needed checking. A ranch doesn't care if you're a widow or not. It demands your attention every single day, and I'd learned to be grateful for that. Kept me from thinking too much about the empty house waiting behind me. By the time the sun crept over the eastern ridge, painting the snow pink and gold, I'd finished the morning chores. My hands ached from the cold despite my gloves, but there was satisfaction in the work. Henry used to say I was tougher than any cowhand he'd ever hired. I wished he could see me now, still keeping his dream alive, still holding on to this land we'd built together from nothing. Inside, I lit the stove and made coffee, then turned my attention to the Christmas tree I'd dragged in the day before. It stood in the corner of the front room waiting to be decorated. I pulled out the box of ornaments we'd collected over 40 years of marriage. The tin star Henry had bought in Cheyenne our first Christmas, the wooden angel I'd carved when Sam was born, the glass bird that somehow survived 3 moves and countless harsh winters. My hands trembled as I hung each one, memories flooding back so strong I had to sit down. Henry lifting Sam up to place the star on top, Sam's little boy laughter echoing through these rooms, the Christmas mornings when this house felt full of life and love and future. Now it was just me and the ghosts of better days. Around noon, I heard the wagon coming up the road. My heart lifted despite myself. Sam had promised to bring the children by, and I'd been counting the hours. I smoothed my apron and went to the door, smiling as Emma and Jacob tumbled out of the wagon and ran toward me through the snow. "Grandma!" Emma threw her arms around my waist, and for a moment, everything felt right again. Jacob showed me a drawing he'd made, our ranch, with stick figures and a lopsided barn. "That's you," he said, pointing to a figure with gray hair. "You're the strongest person I know." My throat tightened. "Come inside, both of you. I've got cookies." Sam followed them in, kissing my cheek, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Can't stay long, Ma. Rose is waiting in the wagon." I looked past him and saw her sitting there, reins in hand, staring straight ahead. She didn't wave, didn't even look at the house. Something cold settled in my chest, but I pushed it aside. She could come in, warm up a bit. "She's fine," Sam said quickly. Too quickly. "We've got to get back. Lot to do before Christmas." The children ate their cookies, told me about school, hugged me tight, and then they were gone, climbing back into that wagon, Sam calling out promises to visit again soon. I stood in the doorway and watched them disappear down the road, Rose's straight back never turning, never acknowledging me at all. The wind picked up and I realized I was shaking. Not from cold. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. I walked back inside and looked at the half-decorated tree, at Henry's coat still hanging by the door, at the table set for one. For 7 years, I told myself this was enough, that being useful, being needed, being a good mother and grandmother from a distance was enough. But standing there in the silence, I finally admitted the truth I'd been hiding from. I was disappearing. And the people I loved most didn't even notice I was fading away. 7 years I'd spent making myself smaller, asking for less, accepting whatever scraps of time my family could spare. I told myself it was love, that sacrifice was what mothers do. But was I loving them? Or just teaching them I didn't matter? Have you ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly? The next morning, I was mending fence wire near the south pasture when I heard hoofbeats coming fast. I looked up to see Rose riding toward me on that big roan mare of hers, sitting the saddle like she was born there. And she was. Rose Carter grew up on the biggest ranch in 3 counties, learned to rope and ride before she could read. I'd always admired that about her, even if she'd never seemed to notice. She reined up sharp, the mare dancing sideways, breath steaming in the cold air. Rose didn't dismount right away, just sat there looking down at me, her face hard as the frozen ground beneath my feet. "Martha," she said, "not Ma, not even Mrs. Dawson. Just my given name, flat and cold. Rose." I set down my tools and waited. Something in her posture told me this wasn't a social call. "I came to tell you about Christmas." She shifted in the saddle, leather creaking. "We're doing it at my mother's ranch this year, the Carter place. Ma's hosting a big dinner, important guests from Cheyenne, some folks from back east. It'll be crowded, formal. Not really your kind of thing." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face still. 40 years on the frontier teaches you how to hide pain. "I see," I managed. "And Sam? The children? They'll be there, of course. It's family." She said it like I wasn't, like 7 years of Sunday dinners and birthday cakes and helping with the children when she was laid up with influenza had never happened. "You understand, don't you? We need the space for people who matter to Pa's business. You'd just feel out of place anyway." I wanted to say so many things. Wanted to remind her that I'd taught her how to make Henry's favorite pie when she first married Sam, that I'd sat up with her when Emma had croup, shown her the old Cheyenne remedy that finally broke the fever, that I'd never once made her feel less than welcome in my home, no matter how small it was compared to the Carter Empire. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and smiled, the way I'd learned to do when men talked over me at cattle auctions, when neighbors assumed a widow couldn't manage a ranch alone. "Of course," I heard myself say, "you all have a wonderful time." Rose looked almost disappointed that I hadn't fought back. She wheeled her horse around, kicking up frozen mud. "Sam will stop by after the holiday," she called over her shoulder. Then she was gone, riding back toward the Carter place like she couldn't get away fast enough. I stood there in the cold until I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. That evening, the telegraph boy came with a message from Sam. I read it by lamplight, my hands shaking. "May stop. Hope you understand, stop roses. Family important for ranch business. Stop will visit after Christmas, stop love you, stop Sam." I crumpled the paper and threw it in the stove, watching it burn. Ranch business. Important guests. All the excuses in the world couldn't hide the simple truth. I wasn't important enough to include. The next morning, Eliza Thompson rode over with fresh eggs and the kind of news that travels fast on the frontier. She sat at my kitchen table, her weathered face troubled. "Martha, I don't like to gossip, but you should know. Clayton Carter's been buying up every ranch he can get his hands on, paid triple value for the Morrison place last month, and they say he's got his eye on the old Henderson spread, too." She paused, stirring her coffee. "Word is he's particularly interested in properties with good water rights." My ranch sat on one of the sweetest creeks in the territory. Henry had chosen this land for that very reason. "He tried to buy you out yet?" Eliza asked gently. "No," I said slowly, but Rose mentioned important guests from Cheyenne. Business matters. Eliza's expression told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, honey, that Christmas dinner. It's not about family. It's about showing off Carter power, making deals, pressuring folks to sell." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "They wanted you there to feel small, to see how much they have and how little you do, to make selling seem like the smart choice." After she left, I walked to the window and stared out at the land Henry and I had built together, the barn he'd raised with his own hands, the fences we'd mended through 20 Wyoming winters, the creek that ran clear and cold, the reason this ranch could survive when others failed. I looked at Henry's saddlebags hanging by the door, dusty from 7 years of stillness. "What would you do, Henry?" I whispered. But I already knew the answer. Henry never waited for permission to live his life, and neither would I. They say when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Rose showed me I was disposable, a problem to be managed, not family to be cherished. But here's what I wonder. When you're treated like you don't matter, do you accept it, or do you prove them wrong? What would you have done? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with Henry's old saddlebags spread before me, planning like I was heading out on a cattle drive instead of running away from my own loneliness. Jerky and hardtack went in first, frontier staples that wouldn't spoil in the cold. Coffee, wrapped tight in oilcloth, matches in a tin to keep them dry, extra ammunition for the Winchester, a wool blanket, Henry's journal, the one he'd kept during his cavalry days, filled with his careful handwriting and sketches of the places he'd seen. I ran my fingers over the worn leather cover, and it felt like he was right there beside me, nodding his approval. "You always said I was tougher than I looked," I whispered to the empty room. By the time dawn broke, I was ready. I'd left a note for Sam on the kitchen table, short and simple. "Gone to find some Christmas spirit of my own. Don't worry about me. I know how to take care of myself." Eliza showed up just as I was cinching the saddle on my mare, Juniper. She took one look at the packed saddlebags and the rifle in its scabbard, and her eyes went wide. "Martha Dawson, what in the name of... Where are you going?" "Cheyenne. Maybe the trading post beyond. I haven't decided yet." I checked the stirrups, not meeting her eyes. I just know I can't sit here waiting for scraps of attention like some old dog nobody wants anymore. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and pulled me into a fierce hug. "About damn time," she said roughly. "You've been disappearing for years, and I've been waiting for you to remember who you were before you became everyone's convenience." Her words cracked something open in my chest. I hugged her back hard. "You be careful out there," she said, pulling away and wiping her eyes. "Wyoming winter's no joke, even for someone as capable as you. And if you need anything at all, you send word." "I will. And Eliza? Keep an eye on the ranch for me. If Clayton Carter comes sniffing around, you tell him Martha Dawson doesn't sell her husband's legacy to land-grabbing vultures." She grinned. "That's the woman I remember." I swung up into the saddle, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. Juniper danced beneath me, sensing my mood, ready to run. The morning sun was just cresting the eastern hills, painting the snow-covered plains in shades of pink and gold. I turned Juniper's head north toward Cheyenne and touched my heels to her sides. The land opened up before me, vast and empty and beautiful in a way that made my throat tight. This was the Wyoming Henry had fallen in love with, the wild country that had called to both of us when we were young and foolish enough to think we could tame it. We never did tame it. We just learned to live with its moods, to respect its power, to find our place within its rhythms. I rode hard for the first few hours, putting distance between myself and the ranch, between myself and the life I'd been living like a ghost in my own story. The cold bit at my cheeks, but I welcomed it. I was alive. I was moving. I was choosing something for myself instead of waiting to be chosen. By afternoon, the landscape had shifted, rolling hills giving way to rougher country, scattered pines appearing on the ridges. I stopped to rest Juniper and eat some jerky, looking back the way I'd come. Somewhere behind me was everything I knew, everything safe and familiar. Ahead was nothing but uncertainty. I smiled and mounted up again. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I found a sheltered spot near a stand of pines and made camp. I'd done this 100 times with Henry, back when we were building the ranch, back when we were young and everything was an adventure. My hands remembered the motions, gathering deadwood, building the fire ring, getting the flames going with the precious matches. Juniper was hobbled and grazing nearby, her breath steaming in the gathering darkness. I made coffee in Henry's old tin pot and sat wrapped in my blanket, watching the stars come out one by one. That's when I heard the wolves. Their howls echoed across the hills, wild and lonely and closer than I would have liked. My hand went automatically to the Winchester, leaning against the saddle beside me. I checked that it was loaded, then added more wood to the fire. Wolves usually avoided humans, especially ones with fires, but usually wasn't a guarantee. I should have been terrified. A 62-year-old widow alone in the wilderness with a pack of wolves somewhere in the darkness. But instead, I felt something else entirely. I felt free. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't waiting for someone to remember I existed. I wasn't making myself small to fit into spaces that didn't want me. I was here, alive, capable, facing the wild Wyoming night with nothing but my own courage to keep me warm. The wolves howled again, and I lifted my coffee cup to them like a toast. "I'm still here," I said to the darkness, "and I'm not afraid anymore." I reached Cheyenne by mid-morning, and the town hit me like a splash of cold water after the silence of the plains. Wooden sidewalks clattered with boots, wagons rumbled down the muddy main street, and the air smelled of wood smoke, horse manure, and fresh-baked bread from the bakery on the corner. Cowboys lounged outside the saloon despite the early hour, and a group of women in their Sunday best emerged from the general store, packages in hand. I'd been to Cheyenne plenty of times over the years, but always with Henry, or later with Sam. Never alone. Never as just myself. I tied Juniper to the hitching post outside the sheriff's office and paused before going in, suddenly aware of how I must look. Dusty from the trail, my hair escaping its bun, my split riding skirt practical but unfashionable. Then I remembered the wolves howling in the darkness and how I'd face them without flinching. I squared my shoulders and pushed open the door. The office was warm, heated by a pot-bellied stove in the corner. A man sat at the desk, bent over paperwork, his silver hair catching the light from the window. He looked up when I entered, and I was struck by his eyes, gray-blue and kind, with lines at the corners that spoke of a man who smiled often. "Help you, ma'am?" He stood, and I saw he was tall, broad-shouldered despite his age, wearing a sheriff's badge that gleamed against his vest. "I hope so. I'm planning to ride up to the trading post north of here, and I wanted to ask about the trail conditions, whether it's safe for—" I hesitated. "For a woman traveling alone." Something shifted in his expression, not judgment but concern. "That's a full day's ride in good weather. We had snow 2 nights back, might have drifted in the passes." He came around the desk, studying me more closely. "You're an experienced rider, I take it?" "I've been riding since I was 6 years old, Sheriff. My husband and I built a ranch 40 miles south of here. I know how to handle myself." "Your husband couldn't make the trip?" The question was gentle, not prying, but it still hurt. "My husband died 7 years ago. I run the ranch myself now." His eyes widened slightly. 40 miles south? You wouldn't be Martha Dawson, would you? From the Dawson Ranch on Sweet Creek. I stared at him. "I am. How did you— Henry Dawson's widow." He said it like a prayer, like something sacred. His hand went to his chest, and I saw his fingers tremble. "Lord above, Martha. I'm Dave Monroe. I served with Henry in the cavalry back in the 70s. He was my best friend." The world tilted sideways. I grabbed the back of the nearest chair to steady myself. "You knew Henry?" "Knew him." Dave's voice was thick with emotion. "He saved my life at Little Bighorn's aftermath. I was pinned under my horse, Lakota warriors coming over the ridge, and Henry rode back through the gunfire to pull me out. I owe him everything." He paused, his eyes searching my face. "He talked about you constantly, called you his frontier rose, said you were the strongest person he'd ever known." Tears blurred my vision. I hadn't heard anyone speak Henry's name with such love in years. Sam barely mentioned his father anymore, like the grief was too heavy to carry. "I went to the funeral," Dave continued quietly, "stood in the back. I wanted to pay my respects, but I didn't want to intrude on your grief. I've thought about you often over the years, wondered how you were managing." "I've been managing," I said, and was surprised by how steady my voice was. Until recently, I thought I was managing just fine. Something in my tone made him look at me more closely. "And now?" "Now I'm riding to the trading post alone in December because I'd rather face a Wyoming winter than spend another Christmas being invisible to my own family." The words came out before I could stop them, raw and honest. Dave didn't look shocked or pitying. He just nodded slowly like I'd said something that made perfect sense. "Then you'll need someone who knows the trail," he said, "and it just so happens I was planning to head up that way myself. Trading post always needs a lawman's presence during the winter gathering, keeps things peaceful between the different groups. He reached for his coat hanging by the door. If you'll allow me the honor, Mrs. Dawson, I'd like to escort you, for Henry's sake, if nothing else. I don't need protecting, Sheriff Monroe. I know you don't. His smile was warm and genuine, but I'd appreciate the company. It's been a long time since I've had a good conversation on the trail. We were saddling up outside when a young cowboy led out Dave's horse, a big bay gelding that immediately pinned its ears back and tried to bite the hitching post. The cowboy struggled to hold him steady. He's feeling ornery today, Sheriff. Want me to switch him out? No need. But Dave looked uncertain, and I could see why. The bay was dancing sideways, whites showing around his eyes. Without thinking, I stepped forward. May I? I approached the bay slowly, talking low and steady the way Henry had taught me. The horse's ears swiveled toward me, and I let him smell my hand before reaching for his bridle. I stroked his neck, found the spot behind his ear that horses love, and felt him relax under my touch. That's it, I murmured. You're just cold and stiff from standing still. I know the feeling. Within a minute, the bay was calm, letting me check his girth and stirrups without fuss. I handed the reins to Dave, who was staring at me with something like wonder. Henry taught you that? Henry taught me everything about horses, said I had better hands than any wrangler he'd ever hired. I swung up onto Juniper, settling into the saddle. Shall we? As we rode out of Cheyenne together, heading north toward the trading post, Dave turned to me with that kind smile. Henry told me you were the strongest person he knew, he said quietly. I never understood what he meant until now. Something warm bloomed in my chest. Not quite hope, not quite joy, but something close to both. For the first time in 7 years, someone was seeing me. Really seeing me. Not as Sam's mother or Rose's inconvenience or Henry's widow. Just as Martha. As myself. And it felt like coming home. For 7 years, I'd been a ghost in my own life. Henry's widow, Sam's mother, the ranch woman nobody really saw. Then Dave looked at me and saw Martha. When was the last time someone truly saw you? Not your roles, not your usefulness, just you? By evening, the trading post had transformed into something almost magical. Long tables had been set up in the main lodge, and people from every corner of the frontier gathered to share a meal. The air was thick with the smell of roasted venison, fresh bread, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm pools of light that pushed back the December darkness outside. I sat beside Dave, Ayana's shawl still around my shoulders, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I belonged here. Not because of who I was related to or what I could provide, but simply because I'd shown up. Because I'd been brave enough to leave my empty house and ride into the unknown. You look different, Dave said quietly as someone passed a bowl of stew down the table. Lighter, somehow. I feel different. I accepted the bowl and ladled some onto my plate. Like I've been holding my breath for 7 years and finally remembered how to breathe. He smiled at that, and we ate in comfortable silence for a while, surrounded by the hum of conversation in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Cheyenne, blending together like a song. A Mexican trader was telling a story that had everyone at his end of the table laughing. 2 cowboys were arguing good-naturedly about the best way to break a stubborn horse. Ayana sat with her family, her grandchildren clustered around her like small birds. Henry would have loved this, Dave said suddenly, his voice soft with memory. He always said the frontier was at its best when people stopped fighting over differences and started trading them instead. He said that often, I agreed, my throat tight. Usually right before he'd ride off to help some neighbor he barely knew fix their barn or bring in their cattle. That was Henry. Dave's eyes were distant now, seeing something beyond the lodge walls. Always the first to help, last to ask for anything. That's why what happened at Little Bighorn hit me so hard. I set down my fork, my full attention on him now. It was June of '76, he continued, his voice taking on the careful cadence of someone telling a story they'd lived through but wished they hadn't. Aftermath of the battle, everything chaos and death. My horse went down, pinned my leg. I could hear Lakota warriors regrouping on the ridge, and I knew I was done for. He paused, his jaw working. Then I heard hoofbeats coming back. Through the gunfire and smoke, Henry rode straight toward me like death itself couldn't touch him. He was yelling something, couldn't hear what over the noise, but he got down, pulled me free, threw me over his saddle, and rode us both out of there. My hands were shaking. I'd known Henry had been in battles, but he'd never talked about them, never wanted to bring that darkness home to our ranch. "He took a bullet in the shoulder getting me out," Dave said, and I gasped. "Did you know that?" "No. He had a scar there, but he said it was from a fall." That was Henry. Never wanted credit, never wanted you to worry. Dave's voice was rough now, thick with emotion. "I owe him my life, Martha. Everything I've done since that day, every person I've helped as sheriff, every bit of peace I've managed to keep, it's all because your husband rode back into hell to save a friend." Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't try to hide them. "Thank you for telling me. I needed to know that his life meant something beyond just our ranch. His life meant everything." Dave reached across the table and took my hand, and I didn't pull away. "And Martha, I need to tell you something else. Something I should have said years ago." I held my breath. "After the funeral, I stood in the back of the church and watched you stand there so strong, so dignified, even with your heart breaking. I wanted to come to you, to tell you about Henry, to offer, I don't know, comfort, I suppose, but I was a coward. I told myself you needed space, that you had Sam, that my presence would be an intrusion." He paused, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "The truth is, I was afraid, because Henry talked about you constantly, called you his frontier rose, said you were the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman he'd ever known. And I was afraid that if I came to you, you'd see right through me and know that I'd been half in love with the idea of you for years, just from his stories." The world seemed to stop spinning. "Dave, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know it's too soon, maybe too much. But sitting here with you, seeing you come back to life after whatever darkness drove you out here, I couldn't let another day pass without you knowing the truth. Henry's gone, and I can't change that, but he'd want you to be happy. He'd want you to know that you're remarkable, that you deserve to be seen and celebrated and—" "Dave." I squeezed his hand, cutting him off gently. "Henry used to tell me that the frontier rewards the brave, that the only real mistake is refusing to live because you're afraid of what might happen." I looked into his kind, gray-blue eyes and felt something warm unfurl in my chest, something that felt like possibility. "I've been refusing to live for 7 years. I think it's time to stop." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "There's a dance tomorrow night," he said softly, "part of the winter gathering. Would you honor me?" "I'd like that very much." We sat there, hands clasped across the rough wooden table, while the community meal went on around us. Somewhere in the rafters, a fiddle started playing, and people began to sing, a frontier ballad about home and hope and the long journey it takes to find both. I thought about Henry, about how he'd saved Dave's life all those years ago, how that single act of courage had brought Dave back to me now, when I needed someone to see me, to remind me I was worth more than the scraps my family threw my way. Maybe that's what love does. It echoes forward through time, creating connections we never expect, bringing people together in ways we can't predict. Henry had given me so much in life, and now, through Dave, he was giving me permission to live again. The next evening, Ayana appeared at my door with a dress draped over her arm, a beautiful creation in deep blue wool with intricate beadwork along the collar and cuffs. It was frontier practical, but elegant, the kind of dress a woman wore when she wanted to be seen. "For the dance," she said simply. "You cannot wear trail dust to celebrate life." I tried to protest, but she silenced me with a look. "The beadwork tells a story of a woman who walks through winter into spring. It is your story now, Martha. Wear it with pride." When I emerged from the small room I'd rented, Dave was waiting by the lodge entrance. The look on his face made me feel like a girl again, like someone worth looking at, worth waiting for. "You're beautiful," he said quietly, offering his arm. Inside, the lodge had been transformed. Lanterns cast dancing shadows on the walls, and a fiddler sat in the corner tuning his instrument. The room was packed with people, ranchers and traders, Cheyenne families in their finest, children darting between adults like minnows through reeds. When the fiddle struck up a lively tune, Dave led me onto the floor. I hadn't danced since Henry died, and for a moment I felt awkward, uncertain. Then Dave's hand was steady on my waist, and the music swept us up, and suddenly I was laughing, spinning, alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The community watched us with smiling approval. An older Mexican woman called out encouragement in Spanish. Ayana nodded from where she sat with her grandchildren, her expression peaceful and knowing. That's when I heard the merchant's voice cutting through the music. "Mrs. Dawson, didn't expect to see you here." A traveling trader I'd bought supplies from over the years stood near the door, his eyes wide with surprise. "Wait till folks back in Cheyenne hear about this. Martha Dawson dancing at the trading post with Sheriff Monroe." Something cold touched my spine, the old fear of judgment, of gossip, of what Rose and Sam would think. But then Dave squeezed my hand, and I looked up at the rafters where lantern light flickered like stars, and I realized something profound. I didn't care anymore. Let them hear. Let them talk. Let Rose know that the woman she'd dismissed was out here living, dancing, being seen and celebrated by people who valued her. The photographer appeared then, a man with a large camera on a tripod, flash powder ready. "Hold still, you two," he called out. "This'll make a fine picture for the Cheyenne leader." Dave looked at me, asking silent permission. I smiled and moved closer to him, my hand in his, Ayana's beaded dress catching the light. The flash powder went off with a pop and a brilliant flare, capturing us mid-dance, me laughing, Dave looking at me like I was the only person in the room. The community gathered around us in celebration. "Beautiful shot," the photographer said with satisfaction. "That'll be in next week's paper. You two make a fine couple." As the music started again and Dave pulled me back into the dance, I thought about that photograph traveling back to Cheyenne, being printed in the newspaper, being seen by everyone who knew me. Let them see, I thought fiercely. Let Rose and Sam and everyone who forgot about me see that I didn't need their permission to be happy. I had found my own place, my own people, my own joy, and I was never going back to being invisible again. Task 8. The morning after the dance, Dave and I sat outside the trading post with tin cups of coffee, watching the sun paint the snow-covered hills in shades of pink and gold. I felt peaceful in a way I hadn't in years, not the quiet desperation of someone waiting to be remembered, but the deep calm of someone who'd finally remembered herself. "You thinking about what happens when the news reaches home?" Dave asked gently. I sipped my coffee and nodded. I imagine Sam's already seen the paper, or heard from someone who has. The frontier's a small place when it comes to gossip. Any regrets? I thought about that photograph, me laughing in Ayana's beaded dress, Dave's hand at my waist, both of us looking like people who'd found something worth celebrating. Not a single one. 40 miles south at the Carter Ranch, Sam Dawson stood in the main house holding the Cheyenne leader with shaking hands. The photograph stared up at him, his mother radiant and laughing, dancing with Sheriff Monroe at the Trading Post winter gathering. "Rose!" his voice cracked. "Rose, you need to see this." Rose came in from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. She'd been making biscuits for the ranch hands, trying to prove to her mother that she could manage a household despite Judith's constant criticism. When she saw Sam's face, something cold settled in her stomach. "What is it?" He thrust the newspaper at her. "Ma, she's in Cheyenne, with Sheriff Monroe, dancing. It's in the damn paper for everyone to see." Rose stared at the photograph. Martha, quiet, invisible Martha who never complained, never demanded attention, was transformed. The woman in that picture looked alive, joyful, beautiful in a way Rose had never bothered to notice before. Her first reaction was anger. How dare Martha embarrass them like this? Running off without telling anyone, gallivanting around the territory with some sheriff, getting her picture in the paper like she was someone important. But then she heard the voices drifting in from the yard, ranch hands talking over their morning coffee. "That's the Dawson widow, ain't it? Martha from Sweet Creek?" "Sure is. Heard she rode up to the trading post alone, 62 years old and tougher than most men half her age." Sheriff Monroe's a good man. If he's courting her, she must be something special. Always thought she was. Shame her family didn't appreciate what they had. Rose's face burned. They were talking about Martha with respect, even admiration, and that last comment, that quiet condemnation of her and Sam, hit like a physical blow. She looked at the photograph again and saw what she'd been too blind to see before. Martha wasn't embarrassing them. They had embarrassed themselves by treating her like she didn't matter. Everyone's talking about her, Sam said miserably, about how brave she is, how independent, and they're asking why she wasn't with us for Christmas. Rose, we look like fools, Rose finished quietly. We look like fools who didn't know what we had until someone else saw her value. She thought about that morning she'd ridden to Martha's ranch and told her to stay home, how Martha had just nodded and smiled, hiding whatever pain Rose's words had caused. She'd thought Martha was weak, easily dismissed. But weakness doesn't ride 40 miles alone in December. Weakness doesn't dance in front of a crowd after being rejected by family. Martha hadn't been weak, she'd been patient, and Rose had mistaken patience for permission to treat her badly. "We have to go to her," Rose said suddenly, setting down the newspaper. "Sam, saddle the horses. We're going to Cheyenne." "To bring her home?" Rose shook her head slowly, something like shame and respect warring in her chest. "No, to apologize, and to beg her forgiveness, if she'll even give it to us. I was helping Ayana pack herbs for the winter when I heard the horses. 2 riders coming fast, and even from a distance I recognized the way Sam sat his saddle, just like Henry used to, straight-backed and steady. My heart clenched, but I didn't run. I'd spent too many years running toward people who were always riding away." Dave appeared at my elbow. "Want me to send them off?" "No." I squared my shoulders. "Let them come." Sam and Rose dismounted in the trading post yard, and every eye turned to watch. The frontier doesn't offer much privacy, and everyone there knew who they were, knew what they'd done. I could see the shame on Sam's face, the stiff pride in Rose's posture that was already cracking at the edges. "Ma," Sam started, his voice breaking. I held up my hand. "Before you say anything, I need you to hear this. I won't apologize for living my life. I won't apologize for finding joy after you told me to stay home and be invisible. And I won't come crawling back just because you finally noticed I was gone." Rose flinched like I'd struck her. "We didn't come here to ask you to apologize. We came to—" She swallowed hard. "Can we talk? Privately?" I looked at Dave, who nodded encouragement. "I'll be right here if you need me." The room they gave us was small and spare, just a bed and a chair and a window that looked out on the mountains. Rose stood by that window, her back to me, her shoulders shaking. "I was cruel to you," she said finally. "Not just about Christmas, about everything. I saw you as competition instead of family. I was jealous of how much Sam loved you, how the ranch hands respected you, how you managed to keep going after losing Henry when I can barely manage with everything I have." She turned to face me, tears streaming down her face. "You were everything I was afraid I wasn't, strong and capable and genuinely good. So I tried to make you small, and I'm so sorry." The apology was real. I could hear it in every word. But I'd learned something important these past few days. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting yourself. "I accept your apology, Rose, but things can't go back to how they were. I won't make myself invisible again just to keep the peace." "I know, and I don't want you to." She wiped her eyes. "But Martha, there's something else you need to know. The real reason Ma wanted you at Christmas." She took a shaky breath. "Pa's been buying up every ranch he can. He wants your land, specifically your water rights. That Christmas dinner wasn't about family. It was about surrounding you with Carter wealth and power, making you feel small and poor so you'd be more likely to sell." The betrayal hit me like a fist. "Clayton wants my ranch? He's been planning it for months. That's why I excluded you. Ma convinced me it would help Pa's business interests. I was so focused on pleasing them that I didn't see I was helping them hurt you." Rose's voice was fierce now. "But I see it now, and I'm not going to let him take your land. That's Henry's legacy. It's your home. And if Pa thinks he can bully you into selling, he's about to learn that the Dawson women are tougher than he ever imagined." Something shifted in my chest. Rose wasn't just apologizing. She was choosing sides against her own father. For me. Why would you stand against your family for mine? Because you are my family, Rose said quietly. And because I finally understand what you've known all along. Family isn't about blood or convenience. It's about showing up, and I'm showing up now, even if it's late. I looked at this cowgirl who'd tried to erase me and saw something I hadn't expected. An ally. Maybe even, someday, a friend. Then we fight, I said. Together. That land is not for sale. Christmas morning at the Dawson Ranch was nothing like the grand affair at the Carter place would have been. There was no imported china or crystal, no servants bringing course after course. Just my simple kitchen filled with the smell of roasting venison, fresh bread, and the apple pie I'd taught Rose to make years ago. The recipe she'd forgotten she knew until her hands remembered the motions. Rose worked beside me without complaint, her cowgirl pride replaced by something humbler and more genuine. Sam played with Emma and Jacob by the fire, and through the window I could see Dave helping Eliza's husband repair the fence that had been damaged in the last storm. Community. Support. People showing up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. When we sat down to eat, the table was crowded in the best possible way. My family, yes, but also Eliza and her husband, Dave, and even a few ranch hands who had nowhere else to go. The kind of Christmas Henry would have loved, full of laughter and second helpings and stories that got taller with each telling. Rose caught my eye across the table and smiled, a real smile, not the tight competitive expression I'd grown used to. "Thank you," she mouthed. I nodded. We still had work to do. Clayton Carter wasn't going to give up his plans easily, and the fight for my land was far from over. But for the first time, I wasn't facing it alone. After dinner, Dave and I stood on the porch watching the sun set over the snow-covered plains. His hand found mine, warm and steady, and I didn't pull away. "You did it," he said quietly. "You left, and you found yourself." I found more than that. I looked up at him, at this man who'd known Henry, who'd seen me not as a widow or a mother or someone's inconvenience, but as Martha. Just Martha. I found out that love doesn't mean making yourself small. That family is about showing up, not about blood. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's saddling up and riding out anyway. Henry would be proud of you. I think he'd be proud of both of us. I squeezed Dave's hand for having the courage to start again. Inside, I could hear Emma's laughter and the low rumble of Sam's voice telling a story. Rose was teaching Jacob a card game, her patience surprising even herself. My house was full again, but this time it was full on my terms. With people who saw me, valued me, chose to be here. The Wyoming winter stretched out before us, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. Spring would bring new challenges, Clayton Carter and his schemes. The constant work of keeping a ranch alive, the careful dance of building something real with Dave while honoring what I'd had with Henry. But as I stood there with Dave's hand in mine and my family's laughter warming the house behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone waiting to be remembered, but the quiet, strong hope of someone who'd remembered herself. My cowgirl daughter-in-law had told me to stay home, so I'd saddled up and found a bigger home than I'd ever imagined, one that lived inside my own courage, my own worth, my own refusal to disappear, and I was never, ever going back to being invisible again. I learned something profound out there on the frozen Wyoming plains. The people who take you for granted aren't cruel, they're just comfortable. They'd grown so used to my presence that they forgot I was a person, not a convenience, and I'd let them. For 7 years, I'd taught them I didn't matter by never demanding to matter. But here's the truth the frontier taught me. You can't wait for others to see your value. You have to see it first, claim it fiercely, and walk away from anyone who asks you to be smaller than you are. That's not selfishness. That's survival. That's the only way love ever becomes real.